Every man of the expeditionary force got ready to jump in the system. They believed perhaps this time they could fulfill their vengeance, and they'd be able to croak these damn toads. Everybody knew what they looked like, as it was very well categorized. Large quadrupedal amphibians. Their homeworld was a very lush rainforest that allowed them to actually survive quite nicely, especially since the amount of bugs that are around is absolutely insane. Now, some people used to complain about the size of the bugs in the northern part of said northern hemisphere, but on this planet, everybody got ready to be disgusted as the bugs are the size of dogs. From the small yippy dogs that you just sometimes want an alligator to chew on, all the way to the size of Great Danes. This is not something anyone look forward to, as these can actually pick you up and take you away. Yet, they didn't worry, because anything that didn't have more than 2 legs they were going to destroy. They worried also about the toads because they're surprisingly technologically advanced for a species, using mostly bioorganics to actually work their own weapon systems and ships and such things. They colonized their neighbor planet, which wasn't exactly the moistest planet. However, it will make do. Everybody knew that if this was going to be a fight, then they're going to have some major issues. The toads themselves aren't dangerous per se, at least not one-on-one, because you can just shoot them. But they're dangerous due to their high numbers and the size of the toads themselves. They breed sometimes in clutches of dozens, sometimes 100, and when they're fully grown, which does take about a decade or two, they average about 5'9" if they stood up on their hind legs, roughly 1.75 meters, and will weigh a good 225 pounds at the low end, which is 102 kilograms. That's pretty heavy, and that's a lot of mass coming at you very, very quickly. The force from their hop is actually a direct strike, because they don't actually jump like a jumping spider and land on their prey. No. Instead, they jump directly at you. And if they hit, that's enough inertia and that's enough mass to easily break bones of anyone who's not in an exosuit. They do have weapons, but everybody laughs as they're basically just overdone squirt guns. They're based on water. Most everything in their technology is based off water, actually. They're dangerous, very dangerous at point-blank range, but no one expects to get within the 10 meters it takes before this thing becomes lethal. Almost like those god-awful weapons in those old video games where you had to get close. Very, very dangerous, but you had to be right in someone's face. All that being said, they didn't worry because everybody dropping in was going to be in exosuits. The new armored exosuits are very, very well designed and should be able to take the impact from any of these toads hopping into them. Not to mention, there's a lot of fun weapons that come on this. Upon entering the system, they expected immediate contact, and they got it. Just not quite what they were expecting. As they came out of FTL, a rogue ship drifted right towards the formation. Everyone immediately went into evasive maneuvers and scrambled to get out of the way without crashing into each other. Everybody was amazed at this. At first, they thought some sort of torpedo was coming, and then they saw that this was no torpedo. They watched as the ship entered the formation and slowly drifted by. It didn't take a genius to see that there was clear battle damage all over it. The entire sector, when scanned, was actually packed with destroyed ships. Immediately, there was a call for retrieval of these ships and any intel they might have, but above all else, to look for survivors. Something was wrong. The invasion was immediately placed on hold as ships are searched all around the sector and intel is gathered. While searching the ships, it turned out that they were just absolutely packed with bodies. Bodies floating around the void. Floating around with the last thoughts of fear frozen on their faces. Though you couldn't see much emotion on the face, it was the eyes. It was the eyes that of panic, that of anger, that of rage, of regret. Everyone knew these eyes, and it made it so most folks wouldn't even look as they pushed the body out of the way, looking for any possible survivors. Maybe they potted like the other ones did, but no. After pushing past the bodies, the drives were searched. Anything. It took a little bit for the technology to interface with anything organic and get enough power that actually worked. But it seemed as though all the drives were scrambled by some sort of high-frequency EMP. Whatever they got off was distorted messages, some text, images that don't really look like much, as they just kind of look like some sort of image of Bigfoot, blurry as all hell. Everything was, of course, gathered as they get ready to send it back to Earth for analysis. Perhaps those guys with the 50-pound brains and all that equipment can figure out what in the hell is going on. All this time, calls are sent to the Toad homeworld and its colony world, but nothing. As the fleet gets closer, they notice that the 4 moons of the homeworld are just gone. This is nothing new in the neighborhood, of course. Yet without the moons to stabilize their atmosphere, they looked at the planet and they could see that there were storms slowly circling the planet. Each of these seemed to range all the way from the north to the southern pole and just slowly wrapping around. For times, it was almost impossible to see the green marble that floated in space as the white of the clouds simply wrapped around once over and over again. The lightning would crash right in the center of these storms, so large that it could be seen from space. Not just the flash, but the bolt itself that would stretch all the way from one pole to the other. Everybody knew this was not going to be easy, but at least it'll be interesting. Before the drop onto the main homeworld, a group would be split off to check out the once green colony world. This was surprising. It didn't look like the records, and it wasn't green, but mostly brown. Something was definitely wrong. While this was going on, the main force would head to the Toad homeworld and have to force a landing down like they had done before. Dropping the shuttles right behind the storm cell would maximize their ability to function down on the surface. The forced landing, unfortunately, had to go through the very edge of the storm, so it was a bit bumpy, but of course doable with the current technology. Upon landing, everybody assured that the locals would rush over to receive aid. They would need something, having to deal with these storms constantly. They didn't think that any of the flying insects would be moving around much, especially in that wind. They might just bury themselves. Perhaps they're in a hibernation cycle, something. They figured that somebody would be there. Stepping off the ramp, they were greeted by a soft, soaked terrain and a very unsettling silence. As everybody moved out, they looked around, they checked their scanners. Something was wrong. There was no locals at all. No one showed up. No one raised out of the muck. No one came out of the trees. Nothing. There was also no biomachinery sending off any signals. That was bad enough, but there was no insects either. Nothing. Just a whole bunch of rotting trees, a whole bunch of sludge, and silence. They all began to move out very slowly. Not sure what was going on, but the entire expedition kept checking their sensor readings over and over and over again. They did this because something else was wrong. Everybody believed it was a simple glitch, but it was reading life everywhere. And how could all the sensors be reading this? This was strange. Everyone kept looking around every time they checked their own sensors, but nothing was moving. Not even the wind was moving. It was as though the wind was only in the storms and everywhere else was just quiet and silent. There was only a 13-hour window before the next large storm rotates to the landing zone and they had to be gone. So they had to find something. Very soon they found the remnants of the residents' homes and began to search. searching for anything, and they found nothing. No personnel. No food was left behind. Just the remnants of their tech. It was strange. The call was made to go into the data points that they could find, finding anything to plug into, to find any type of details, because it seemed as though their sensors weren't working right. Plugging into the biomachines made them slightly hum as they came back to life. It's though they just needed a little bit of power and off they went. It was not the best sound to listen to by any stretch of the imagination, but at least it wasn't silence. Some of them didn't just hum, but pulsed. A few of them snapped and cracked and popped and just went out as they weren't able to handle any energy anymore. It will also take some time for the data collectors to pull anything from the biocomputers, as the biocomputers are all sorts of messed up. While the biocomputers are being downloaded, everyone keeps looking around. Everyone checks in and says they don't find anything, nothing. "We ain't found shit" was a very common phrase said. They do find ships, though, still parked, still waiting to fly. Nothing is wrong with them, absolutely nothing. In fact, learning how to boot them up, and you could actually turn them on, which was surprising. They also found the ground transports, all lined up, all ready to go, many of them right next to the domiciles, but nothing. For some reason, there wasn't anything there. They even came across a few of the farms that were abandoned. They found the pits where most of the maggots are hatched in poles, but nothing was there. It was though this whole place had been raptured, and God had only come for the toads. It was strange. There was just nothing there. Everyone also continued to complain about how soft and squishy the surface is. The heavy suits tended to sink down into the muck a little bit. Some of them used their thrust packs to try and bounce around a little bit, but landing inside a soft spot meant you'd sink up to your knees. So most everybody was told to get over it. Just deal with it. With time running short, a few of the leaders called it and already started heading back to their shuttles. As they did, screams began to come across the comms, screaming, "Contact! Contact! Contact!" They would get the response, "From where?" "Everywhere!" Across the entire search zone, everybody began to freak out as the sludge they were sliding through seemed to come alive. It became active and started grabbing at everybody's legs, trying to pull them down, seeming to try to tear apart their armor. Tentacles began to come out of the dark sludge, shot up and started grabbing the arms and shoulders of everybody. This showed a modicum of intelligence, because they knew that if they held on to the shoulders, even if they freed the legs, this person wasn't going anywhere. The tentacles then began to pull the weapons away from everybody they could get a hold of, many firing desperately into the sludge, trying to get away. In desperation, they began to use their flamethrowers to melt off these slimy tentacles. It worked, if only for a few moments, as the plasma throwers only have a limited amount of fuel. As they spun them from side to side, the tentacles began to reach up and grab the plasma throwers right behind the wrist, trying to rip them out of the soldiers' hands. Yet, even though they might be able to get a few of these free, usually let go once they ran out of fuel, the plasma throwers built into the suits, well, that was a whole nother bag of worms. They were able to use the flames to knock the tentacles off, but it seemed as though as soon as the tentacles retreated, another one would come up out of nowhere, or sometimes they would simply swap and you'd still be grabbed onto. The flame was only mildly effective, but explosives seemed to make the sludge retreat. It wasn't hard to figure out that the shock wave from anything exploding seemed to hurt whatever in the hell this was. Realizing this, they would use the explosives to make a path to get where they needed to go. Everybody kept using the same phrase over and over again. It seemed as though the sludge could figure this out, because the moment you said "frag out," it seemed to keep itself away from the grenade that was landing. Yet also, This slime seemed to jump up, and any fragmentation grenade that was coming down seemed to be knocked off into a totally different direction. This was trouble, but nothing they couldn't handle for the moment, as most were right next to their shuttles. Inside one hut, Captain Cause noted his download was nearly complete and tried to keep the sludge back, even though it seemed to ooze towards him closer and closer from all sides as though it has a mind. He was hearing the call for evacuation and immediately told his men to go, saying, "I'll be right behind you." Everybody knew that was a line of bullshit, but they needed to get going as it was. Yet he stayed behind as he thought, "I need this intel." Most everybody believed they were safe inside their suits until they heard the screeching from others as the slime was finally able to encompass a few of the men and is able to force a breach into the exosuits, sometimes ripping an arm piece off, a leg piece, perhaps even the helmet. The mucus then wraps around whatever it was, slimes all the way inside the exosuits and covers the body and begins to dissolve the entire body, dissolving it all in a matter of 2 minutes. Each of those that had their suits breached died screaming as the flesh of their bodies is melted and eaten away as the nerves feel every little bit. Those who see this try to save their buddies, but it's too late. Their bodies melt faster than being plunged into a tank of acid. The screams came out, "Don't let it touch you! Don't let it touch you! Get it off of you!" And of course, "Evac now!" was all they got from their comm systems from anybody inside the shuttles. They were using their own flamethrowers to try and keep this off the ramps, trying to make sure that they were going to be able to take off. Captain Cause finally saw on his device, "Download complete." He immediately grabbed his device, shoved it in his pocket, and ran towards the shuttle as fast as he could. As he first started running, the mucus was barely up over the soles of his boots. Yet as he kept running, it kept sliming up more and more and more, trying to grab a hold of him, slowing him down more and more with each step. He pulled out his plasma thrower and burned as much of it off as he can, but it was still slowing him down. The gyros inside, along with the mechanical muscles, strained along with his own muscles that burned as he kept forcing himself forward. When his plasma ran out, he resorted to the explosives. In desperation, he dropped one of the grenades at his feet, not saying anything, knowing that the sludge was going to take up most of the impact. When it exploded, the sludge pulled back immediately, seeming to be in complete and total pain. Once he realized that his suit was no longer being gripped, he was able to utilize his jump pack as there was no way to use it before. Up he went, landing, immediately hitting his jump pack again, bounding as fast as he could. With the shuttle now coming into sight, he knew that he was going to be able to make it. As he jumped, he could see some of the empty suits of those that didn't make it. Those that got pulled down had their suits ripped open and melted down into nothing as though they opened up the Ark of the fucking Covenant. In mid-jump, he heard a sound he really did not want to hear. He suddenly ran out of fuel. Because he had no way of slowing himself down, he plummets to the ground right next to the shuttle and right next to his unit. Many of them rush out, grab a hold of him, and run him right inside the shuttle as it begins to ascend even before the doors are closed. As the doors shut and the shuttle goes up towards the air, it's suddenly pulled down and yanked hard to the side. Everyone inside is thrown around by the sudden movement, and the sludge has reached up and is currently holding the shuttle, keeping it from leaving, and pulling it harder and harder to the ground as the pilots desperately try to crank the engines as hard as they can, trying to pull them up, suddenly cursing that they don't have the old school drop engines as they would be using thrust. Instead, they have the gravimetric engines that don't give off heat, so they can't burn this off. The pilots twist and turn the shuttle as much as they can. Everyone in the back is trying desperately to grab onto something, anything to keep themselves from being torn around. If they do get a hold of something, suddenly they're hanging upside down just by their fingertips, and then the next moment later, all their brethren are landing on them with a giant thump as they try desperately to hold on for dear life. The pilots still twist up, pull up, and try to crank the engines as hard as possible, all the time calling for anyone to come and pull them out of the fire. Thankfully, their calls are answered as several aerospace fighters come flying in and fire everything into the slime holding the shuttle. As the ordnance hits, it explodes, forcing the shuttle up, sending everybody down to the floorboards and right into the deck. Everybody realized that the shuttle was finally free as they felt themselves ascend up towards the fleet. As they head up through the atmosphere, a call comes out for anyone willing to go back and try to pull the equipment they lost, try to grab any of their brethren that may be behind. Everybody knows that's a moot point because their brethren are completely melted, and what waits for them is nightmare fuel on meth. One of the commanders gets on the comms and says, "Yeah, I don't care what anybody says. You're not big enough, and there's not enough of you in the fleet to get us back on that planet." Everybody who heard this laughed, a laugh that they desperately needed after what they went through. Captain Cause, however, was sitting in the back, holding the data storage device in his hand. He realized that this would be the first time in the expedition's history that they had lost personnel. He looked at that data storage device again and said, "This had better be worth it." On the colony world, they didn't face any slime. They didn't face anything, actually, as the world itself had gone completely dry. Around the planet, bodies lay rotting in the hot sun. Checking the bodies, they can't find even a hint of the disease that almost destroyed them. Instead, this was not a disease that took them out, nor was it the sun. This was a massacre. The entire population might have been able to survive, but the entire population had been destroyed, killed, murdered. Many of them were seen blasted by energy weapons as parts of them had been cut off cleanly with something hot like a laser, maybe a lasgun perhaps. Others were busted apart with kinetic weapons. Nothing too crazy, but it was enough to do the job. Everybody knew what was going on, and most of the males they could see were shown dead holding weapons, so whatever they had done, whoever they had faced, hopefully these warriors gave them what for. And they definitely died protecting their families. Everybody knew this, as one particular picture was shown to the entire force. It made it all the way to Earth as well. A picture of a group of dead males all holding their weapons, seeming to protecting a single female who was huddled in the corner. You knew it was a female, as the females of this species are easily 2 to 3 times larger than the males. Inside all 4 of her arms, she is protecting the young, trying to shield them. Whatever had come for them took their time with her. There was multiple shots through the arms, or legs if you want to call them that. There were many shots through the abdomen, maybe to take out her reproductive system, who knows, but it must have been slow. The one final shot that took her out was a kinetic round right to the dome. It was clear that whoever had invaded this planet had simple orders: no survivors. Looking around to the planet, you could also see that most of the infrastructure was destroyed, not damaged, but razed to the ground. Entire towers looked like somebody blew up the base and let it fall over so it made a big splat. Bridges over what were once raging rivers were now at the base of these dry creek beds. All the power conduits, relay stations, hell, even the water pipes had been destroyed. It seems as though somebody had just went on and carpet bombed the place, but made sure they hit directly where they needed to. What little bit of the communication systems they could find had also been shot, as in literally shot, as in there's no way that's coming back. Looking at the devastation and the sheer massacre that took place, everybody started to ask who or what did this, and why. Why the destruction of the innocent? The more they thought about it, this made humanity's blood boil even more, brought it to a fever pitch of hate, anger, and sheer rage. Before leaving, they still paid their respect to the fallen warriors, and that's all they could do at that point. That, and they set up a small memorial. They took a large stone and carved what they could into it, commending the former civilization that fought to the very end to protect themselves, did not falter, did not give up at all, and how they will be avenged, as warriors will always avenge warriors. Many wondered why this planet was invaded instead of infected, and then it just hit everybody like a brick going, well, duh. There was no moon on this planet. And without the removal of the moons, they couldn't cause the atmospheric disturbance. Without the atmospheric disturbance, they wouldn't be able to spread the infection. It may be a colony world, but everyone's still spread out way too much. With nothing left to do in this sector, it was time to leave. Even with more evidence, they didn't have anything conclusive to nail it against a particular species, so they would continue to search. And on to the next species it was. The next jump would send the expeditionary force to the homeworld of a very advanced species. A species that when you look at them, they're almost like ghostly pale elves that are looking like little bitty humanoids. Many folks call them blancos, and some call them powders. But most will just call them cute, because they're so small and just so cute to look at. Especially with their small stature and feminine look, even for the males, they just look cute. There's no other way to talk about it. As the expeditionary force gets ready to jump into their system, everyone gets ready, because they still want to go pick a fight. The pucker factor, however, is raised as everyone is wondering if their luck is going to run out. They have a few losses on the last expedition, but nothing substantial. This time they will be facing a very, very advanced species. Jumping into the system, they find a warning, and immediately they're targeted, all their ships. Around the systems, remnants of two distinct different ships are found everywhere, two different fleets. That is when the fleet admiral of the expeditionary force sends out a message that says, "We've come in peace." He sets it to repeat until they get a response. With that, clearly the locals are coming up with their own fleet. Although not quite as large, the numbers are definitely there. This strange little white elf says, "We will not be fueled again, you scaly bastards. Leave this sector before we destroy the rest of your ships." The Admiral responds, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding." "Your subterfuge will not protect you this time. The fact that you have arrived in ships of strange design will not fool us. Tuck your tail to your legs and remove your scaly menace from our space." Scaly? With that, the Admiral flipped on the full video. "I've been called many things, but this is the first time I've been called scaly." The little pale elf was confused. You are human." "Yes, we are." "We are now aware of our mistake, but we are very puzzled." "Are you in need of assistance?" "Oh, all we can get." The human fleet moves closer, but prioritizes the idea of powering down any weapon systems or keeping them inside and covered to show all peaceful intents. It's clear that a large-scale battle had taken place. They try to identify the other species, but nothing quite comes up. It's strange. Everybody still wanted to call them cute, but cute was actually a slang term over in their species, which was going to lead to some very interesting thoughts. It's like another word in our language that is very well diverse. so most people decide just call them the pretties. The pretties have a home world in this sector plus 3 colonized worlds in the system. Through the sensors, it's clear that each of them has been hit in different degrees. The colony worlds, well, 2 or 3 of the outer defenses had been breached and the worlds had been bombed very, very heavily. One world was nearly unlivable now, as there was a huge dust cloud. It seemed like it's going to be blocking out the sun and create a nuclear winter. The other one should be able to be recovered in time. The planets that still held a defense line are dealing with the fallout due to ships, ordnance, random debris, satellites, and all other items falling into their atmosphere. As each piece fell through the atmosphere, it burned a strange, odd color and made it turn into a type of purple rain of metal. However, even though some thought this was funny, the devastation of the large ships crashing into a residential area, or God help you, a city, at Mach 7 cannot be underestimated. As the human fleet got close, they realized what they needed to do and they immediately got to work. The pretties explained how they had survived so well after the Great Cataclysm, as many of their moons were no longer there. Initially, they just had to clean up the massive mess from the huge storms that came through. When their females went through the same process as the human females, it angered them, sure, but it didn't send the pretties into a quest of vengeance like humanity. At least, not yet. They truly mourned their dead, of course, though they had a secret up their sleeves. Being one of the only true self-regeneration species, they had an issue with population growth already. It's well noted that their birth rates were very, very low, even compared to humans. So in order to thrive again, they had to fall back on an old biological trait. Though required in the past in their history when they faced complete demographic collapse before, this was something that was seen as almost taboo by today's standards. The biological trait for the pretties was a experience of shift in their own biomechanics when there's not enough females. This sort of thing is considered very personal, which is why it's a taboo subject. After the cataclysm they faced when their females were killed off by this strange virus bacterial fungus, approximately 40% of the surviving males ended up dumping their Y chromosomes. This was usually very random across their species, unless someone chemically induces it, something that is done but very, very rarely. The transformation itself takes about a local year to complete, which is 1.8 years in Earth time, though about 7% of cases that try this simply stop for unknown reasons, and they would end up creating a sort of hermaphrodite, which is why the process is also very taboo. It's also of note that anyone who stops halfway is completely sterile by any and all metrics. The 93% that finished the transformation became fully female, inside and out, and are able to reproduce very soon after the transformation. This allowed their species to refill its population, albeit very, very slowly over a couple of centuries. This entire process made all the human delegation that heard it very uncomfortable, and in a few cases, very grossed out. Yet, it is of note that when the humans start talking about, as the pretties put it, hatching human infants from a tube, grossed them out to a point where a few of them actually did have to leave to vomit. Yet everyone agreed on one thing. We all do what we must to survive. There was also the question of what, who, or whatever had tried to delete the pretties. Crossing all the information with the pretties, of course, humanity finally had the answer they had been looking for so long. It turned out it was the lizard people, and they'd set this whole thing up. What amazed everybody was the coordination. It absolutely amazed everybody that they were able to pull this off and not get busted until this point. However, being impressed doesn't stop someone from being very angry. As they all cross-referenced their own data, along with data from the destroyed civilizations, a pattern clearly emerged. First was the removal of the moons. This caused the entire planet to turn on itself and made communications pretty much impossible. Made any type of travel to and from the planet pretty much impossible. Not to mention, every single time they did this, they called away the majority of the fleets to make sure they weren't seen. Somehow they were still able to sneak past whoever remained. The second part was to introduce the disease during this whole debacle. Somehow they were able to get through with some sort of stealth tech, but for most, they realized what had happened. Their ships were not in orbit, and even if they were, they wouldn't be able to communicate, and the ships were simply destroyed. After which, the third section, they just had to wait for the extermination, for the extinction. What they did not expect, everyone was pretty sure, that some sort of mutations might happen as well. On the fourth portion of this plan, after a certain amount of time, if a species wasn't exterminated, well, the lizards would actually show up and finish the job. If everything was successful, then they go on to the fifth and final section, which is to rule the entire galaxy uncontested. The simplicity of this plan is not insane, but one had to realize that this plan has about as much chance of success as the old school Schlieffen plan. Although the pretties didn't know what was going on, all the humans thought about it for a moment and then just started laughing. A strange sound that kind of disturbed the pretties, but they just kept going. As the expeditionary force helped the locals rebuild everything from their infrastructure to their homes, even helping them plant crops, the locals appreciate the humans' care to detail, and of course, their power. Humans are much larger and much, much stronger than the pretties. Even though the pretties can actually squeeze into areas and do more, shall we say, detailed work, it was still up to the humans to make sure that the large pieces were put into place beforehand. Not to mention, they were surprised at how fast the humans actually operate, and this allowed for even more of their people to survive. Yet they understand there was one thing they had to listen for at all times, especially dealing with areas that had just been struck by some sort of debris falling through. If the humans were searching, if they ever heard, "Medic!" or "Doc!" everybody had to get the hell out of the way because the humans are coming through and they're not going to be in any way, shape, or form moving from the direction they're going. If they have to step on you to get to where they need to go, that's exactly what they're going to do. Many humans would sacrifice themselves if need be, trying to get into these areas to try and save survivors. The humans takes the saving of the innocent extremely serious, and many of them are all sorts of happy, almost to the point of giddy, of saving the youngest out of all the species. Yet they get clearly angry if they can't save everyone. Even if they save 99 out of 100, that one will make them lash out, make them strike the ground, make them curse, make them scream. And this confuses all the pretties. They've done so well. Why would they take this so personally? As they're all working, suddenly all the humans on the entire planet stop, reach for their comms device, and listen close. They all receive the message to return, and return now. They try to excuse themselves the best they can, leaving all the supplies they had behind and just bolt towards their own ships. They rush to the ships, and before anybody can even sit down, the ships begin to lift off and leave the planet. All those on the planet are just confused. What the hell just happened? Everybody on board begins to gear up without a single word. As they gear up, they get the message, "Prepare for immediate deployment. Expect heavy resistance." Even while gearing up, those inside the ships are a little taken aback on the fact that they're actually lifting off, as they kept asking things like, aren't we going to fight on this planet? Or, why are we going in such a hurry? What's going on? The order simply stated, gear up, sit down, strap in, shut up, and hold on. Everybody knew what that meant. The shuttles, corvettes, and frigates lifted off and had themselves at flank speed going out into the atmosphere, throwing most of the crew towards the back, but they still geared up as best they could, fighting the G-forces. They did this because even though they're confused, they were thinking one thing. We're leaving the planet, so we need to be ready for anything. Everyone eventually got the briefing as the fleet came together. While comparing intel, it was clear who or what the enemy is, of course. The lizard folks wanted to wipe out all other sentient species, and if the disease didn't do it, they would take out the remnants of the species by any means necessary, and if that meant they had to get up close and personal, that's what they're going to do. And this is what's happening right now. Another species had sent out a distress call which barely came through, but they were able to clear it up. The distress call was claiming that they were under attack, and everybody wanted to know who they're under attack from. And when they saw a picture of one of the ships, that's all humanity needed to be on the way. Normally, humanity would not interfere with an internal conflict, but the lizards are attacking. The species being attacked is called the termic. They're very, very humanoid. At first glance, if somebody was colorblind, it'd be easy to mistake the two. But if you are seeing any color, you would notice the yellow or almost dark orange skin of the termic. They're also taller than the average human, with nearly solid green eyes, with a type of dark red mane that stretches from the front of their forehead all the way to the back of their neck. Their planet is also very, very colorful, and many humans wanted to visit as it is considered a paradise world, at least by human standards, of course. But then again, humans come from a level 13 death world, so what the hell do we know? Everybody was actually just wondering how in the hell they survived this long. It was a giant question mark. But that didn't matter. Humanity didn't really care about these yellow-skinned whatevers. They were going there to take out some snakes. Everybody during the trip is looking over their data as the fleets converge for a jump. The Admiral actually made a call towards Earth before leaving, requesting reinforcements. When he got the response, how many? He simply stated, all of them. Adjust your departure for time on target. After confirming everything with Earth, all they heard was, prepare to jump immediately, to all the ships. A quick jump to FTL can be very jarring, to say the least. So much so that most, if they are not ready, are going to vomit inside their helmet as soon as you go either in or out of FTL. Realizing they're about to do a quick jump, everybody grabbed onto anything they could, and they held on very tight. Jumping into the sector, the Expeditionary Force was joined by the Earth fleet of 69 corvettes, 16 frigates, 15 destroyers, 8 cruisers, and 4 battleships. The Expeditionary Force was joined by Task Forces 16 and 17, and these were the latest off the line. Throughout the entire sector, from the 2nd planet to the 6th planet, battles rage as a very large group of ships advances towards the locals' homeworld. The locals are fighting and fighting hard, but they are losing to much larger and more powerful ships from the lizards. Then they see the human fleet combine, form up, and advance, and everybody, without even being able to read minds, knows exactly what's going through the locals' mind. It sounds something like, we're fucked, we're fucked, we're fucked, we're fucked, we're fucked, we're fucked, we're fucked. The 5 lizard battleships didn't seem to even notice or even care that the human fleet had arrived, as they escorted their invasion carriers to the homeworld. On the way, they would break off other groups to invade the other colony worlds as they advanced towards the homeworld itself. The communications coming from these planets and sometimes space stations were broadcast throughout the human fleet. These were desperate cries for help, cries and begs for mercy, and cries of pain, usually ending with the burst of a weapon. Even without knowing the language, the tone is absolutely clear. Every man listening suddenly had their protective instincts kick in to a level they didn't realize was possible anymore. Every man sunk inside himself for just a moment as they remembered the pain they had to experience as their loved ones were seizing on the table, on the floor, blood coming from different orifices, maybe their eyes, ears, wherever it was, as they tore themselves to pieces, many times their heart beating so fast that it exploded inside their chest. These creatures had ended entire families. Entire regional groups on Earth were just gone. They're now a footnote in history because of what these creatures did. Aboard the human fleet, it suddenly got quiet. Normally before a mission, everyone's laughing and joking, trying to light the mood, but not this time. The silence was finally broken on the flagship bridge as the navigations officer relayed that all ships are in position and advancing as one. The admiral nodded, reached for his comms, and decided to send out two separate messages. One would be broad-based and picked up by every single ship inside the sector. The second message would only be picked up by his own ships. The first message, as the turrets began to adjust themselves, "Payback's a bitch." Then switching the comms to his own ship, saying, "All ships, bring the rain." Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me on the fourth part of this series. Before I go, I need to send out some special thank yous to a few of my supporters, and those will be Erica Gem, Ava Clark, MTF Guard, Guardian Sage, SS Demon, Brian Kemp, Chris Dixon, and Cause Lynn. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I will see you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.